Tonight's episode, we have Alan H Greenfield on the show. Alan's a UFO researcher, author, occultist, and prolific writer and social mediaist. So we'd just like to get right in it now, and we'll invite Alan into the show. You're now on the breakfast tea then?
No, I've got it right here.
Yeah, I'm the same.
It'll keep me going. Otherwise, if we talk for longer than an hour, my voice will become 76 years old. Well, the real reason that, that I'm here is because I want to be sort of, where am I?
So good to have you on. I've done a short intro just before you came in there. On you, and just if you want to kind of tell the audience, if you want to just a little bit about yourself, just some of the audience who have been new to the subject coming on and listening to this for the first time. So if you want to give a short rundown of yourself, just quickly, and then we'll kind of move on from there if that's all right.
Okay, sure. I'm Alan Greenfield. I write books about the strange, the unusual, the unknown. And I am blessed or cursed with a sense of bizarre humor. So I'm absolutely earnest under it all. However, don't mistake that for someone who, like many people in these paranormal fields, does not take the denizens of the paranormal universe very seriously, because I do. Mm-hmm. It's also daytime on this side of the pond at the moment, so you will see actual sunlight shining through the. Oh no! I'm melting! What a world! Okay.
Is this quite early for you? I do appreciate you coming on early for me.
I know why you did that, because you calculated at midnight you will turn into a pumpkin, correct?
Definitely. And I'd need to be drinking 8 cups of coffee as well. I'm on the breakfast tea now. I try to avoid the beer because I'd talk that fast, he probably wouldn't understand me. So
I'm glad your shirt says "Gone Sasquatching" and not "Gone Bigfooting."
Yeah, gone squatching.
I've really got it in for 2 terms that are common in the field. One is Bigfoot, which immediately, for people out there in the great sort of washed public, sounds ludicrous, because it's, this image of some guy with really big feet. And the other one is what I like to call, in the spirit of UFO, I like to call it UAP. And I think the term UAP is probably something that should be relegated to the dustbins of.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Yeah, on both counts, the Bigfoot and the UAP. UAP's been cutting about for a good while. I seen it it was in a British UK UFO report going back to the late 90s. And
it can be used, there are a bunch of terms that have been tried out, from flying saucers on, and then if you go back in history, they were angels or demons, depending on your, your particular position in the clergy. It's demons, burn a couple more witches, okay? Of course, they say that in rather good medieval Latin, which is not actually good Latin, but we'll pass on that.
It was interesting you made in the last email, you made reference to Robert Kirk.
Yeah, I have an interesting side note on that before we talk about Kirk himself.
Yeah.
When I got involved with the Hellier folks
Yeah.
who've been very good to me, and I've tried to be good to them, and they're wonderful people. It occurred to me that Greg comes from a family of preachers,
Mm-hmm.
and this must be more appreciated among Scots than among anybody else. But Kirk
Mm-hmm.
is church, so
Yeah.
he's the new church, and they go to this little town, and printed neatly on the banquette or sidewalk or whatever it is, it says Newkirks.
Yeah.
And I thought, and they're looking for where Indrid Cold lives, which I think they actually found,
Mm-hmm.
although it was not where I thought it was,
Yeah.
I was stupid enough to listen to Terry way back in the day. But I think that there's a double entendre there,
Mm-hmm.
because they're the new church, and of course Greg speaks sometimes about his alienation from his I guess I don't want to overstate it, his father's Bible beating, and that's
Yeah.
not uncommon. Ask Aleister Crowley. Well, you can't ask him. He's a bunch of ashes under a tree in New Jersey, which is a fitting end to a dissipating life. He probably would have been amused, really.
Oh, it was interesting that when you made the mention to Robert Kirk, I think one of the episodes I had on, because and the Kirk just there, I was there today. I was at Kirk's at the Kirk where Robert Kirk was allegedly. He's got a memorial there now, and where he was allegedly buried, but he's supposed to be his remains weren't there. But I was there today. It was like that's funny enough because synchronistically, when you'd said that in the email, I just returned from there today. Because it's only about for me as a crow flies. Well, it's about an hour's drive, and
Well,
I wasn't going to go there today, and I ended up I took the dog out and I had the kids with me, and I kind of thought I'll, uh, I'll head to the Opals, different place, and I kind of last minute I thought I'm going to head. I've been there a few times. So I kind of headed out there and I took the kids round and I showed them the gravesite and I explained the story to them. Then I took them to Doon Hill, which is the fairy hill as well. So and when I came back in and I got your email, you'd put reference to that in the email as well. You know what I mean? So bit of
yeah.
synchronicity in there.
Did you see the email first and then
No,
go? Or
no, 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 no.
that's a true synchronicity.
It was a
And of
different.
course,
I'd left. I probably left about 11 o'clock. Sorry, no, it was about 12, half past 12. I left for here, so it would have been your time and your time. So we're there for a good number of hours. Took them round there, went up the back hills, Aberfoyle, which is the town where the kirk was and stuff. And I've actually GoPro'd it and videoed it with the kids and stuff. And it's funnily because the actual tree at Doon Hill, it's usually got quite a lot of fairy blessings on it and stuff, and it's got ribbons tied around it and a lot of money on it and things like that. But it had been cleared because quite a lot of time maybe locals will come up and clear it all and stuff and take it away, think it's rubbish. But you can still see offerings there going in and stuff. So we explaining to the kids about it. But it was funny. So when I came back in, just to double check the timings and stuff like that, if you were okay with the timings, and I seen that email and I thought actually it's quite synchronistic. I've just been back for there literally and opened the email. So
when you talk about this stuff, the synchronicities seem to increase. I used to keep a log of all those that happened to me and the circumstances, but frankly, I would be doing nothing with my life other than writing in the log, because the number of synchronicities that happen to people who do field research or who even contemplate this stuff, or for that matter, even see the entire Hellier series to
yeah,
date, you come away from it. I mean, I get the same effect from Philip K. Dick's books. If I read one, and I've read them all now, so I guess I'm out of synchronicities, but there would be an endless number of synchronicities that day, unless I was saying, well, by reading this, there will be synchronicities, in which case they don't happen.
Yeah.
it seems like it wants to be spontaneous, and I think that is acausally highly significant. So
Yeah.
here we go. It validates this particular episode of your program. I'd like to think or hope.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was just a big one today, just coming in and seeing the email. I thought, that's mad. It just came back for there. I mean, so
Next time you go at midnight and take a shovel, because I don't believe that he's buried there or anywhere
no,
in
I don't
this.
think he is either. I think it says that in the plaque next to it as well, that they don't think he's there. But there's a memorial, the actual grave kind of stone, it's there. It's a memorial now. So, but quite interesting. But just a quick one about synchronicities to do with that as well. I was
Well,
listening to.
according to Michael Bertio, if people invest in a location,
Mhm.
it becomes sacred space, whether the actual event took place there or not, in this case, a burial.
Yeah,
So, and the longer that is true, the more true it is, because reality is malleable. And I buy into that. I
yeah,
think that, if you venerate something as the tooth of Jesus Christ or whatever, after, a century or so, that's the era that Bertio puts on it. 100 years constitutes validating a particular egregore in a particular location
yeah,
or object or whatever, which is pretty much what the Newkirks say on their podcast. That objects become haunted not because they were originally haunted, but because they're labeled haunted objects, and people take them to be haunted objects. And at some point, I may be skewering their ideas with my own, but it becomes actually haunted.
yeah.
Or one of the things with all of the episcopal powers that have been put upon me by the nameless order I used to be part of, which if you render something sacred by touching it or by laying on of hands or whatever, it becomes sacred, whether it was initially or not. There are various ways to make something empowered,
Yeah,
whether it's a person, place, or thing.
yeah. That's it's all through belief, attention, and intention, which is kind of manifesting that and bringing that.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
the funny thing was when I kind of was starting the podcast, and the very first way to go to first, my kind of plan was to go first to go to do the story in Robert Kirk, a bit of that, and I was kind of thinking about it, and then I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking to Greg Newkirk um, about the Hellier, and they were talking about the Secret Commonwealth. And I literally had the Secret Commonwealth just kind of sent through. I kind of thought that's quite interesting. I mean, just like kind of hearing that off the off chance, but there's not a lot of people are out buying the Secret Commonwealth before, like apart from obviously after Hellier, maybe more people bought it and stuff. And so I think it was a podcast talking about it, and then or it was maybe Penny Royale. Maybe heard her talking about it as well. So from that, I was kind of looking at Robert. I was going to be looking at Robert Kirk anyway. The book was sitting there, and then I kind of heard him as well, and I came away from it because I was kind of thinking other stuff came up, and looking at other kind of stories and stuff, and I always kind of planned to go back to it, and then before I got a chance, somebody came in and phoned me with like sightings they had. And so that was like the very, very first one I went to. And this, it was like the first or second, it was the first call I got through to actually go and can you see it? And it was in the town of Aberfoyle, where I was going to
Yeah.
do that first story, where it was kind of drawing me back to it again. You know what I mean? So, and eventually when I did kind of go back and I kind of I found an author who was looking into the story. She went in and she got all his records, his diaries, everything. That's quite interesting. I mean, some of the kind of stories for it. But enough of that, you know what I mean? But listen, I appreciate you coming on, taking the time out your day to come on. I
Did
know
I
this.
introduce myself? I don't remember now.
Yes, you
So,
did. You did. Thanks.
okay.
I know this is quite early for you in the day. I mean, so
It's very early because I am a creature of the night.
So, I mean, just kind of what I was going to do was because obviously with your background, you've got a background, obviously, um, in UFO research, obviously in the cult as well. I mean, some of your key books, The Grail Within, Secret Cipher, the Euphonauts, The Complete Secret Cipher Euphonauts, and was it Rituals of the Men in Black, or Secret Rituals of the Men in Black. So just to name a few. You know, I mean, so coming from that kind of aspect, from the occult aspect, and being a UFO researcher and author, yeah, I mean, I kind of thought you've definitely got a different take on what you see out there than maybe other people. Maybe they'll maybe see something that's nuts and bolts or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Or if it's a ghost, they'll see a ghost. You know what I mean? But you'll have a different take on a lot of different things. So my kind of plan was to just get your take on different aspects of some things to see what your take was on it. You know what I mean? No saying that's the right or wrong way. We've all got kind of theories, but I always kind of thought it'd be interesting to hear some of your own theories in regards to the phenomena in general, and then kind of going through some of the phenomena. If that sound all right?
Oh, that sounds fine. In fact, up until just a few years ago, I was, to paraphrase the New Testament, which is not my sacred book, but nevertheless, it is a quotable in Western civilization, albeit in King James translations. But I was a lone voice crying in the wilderness about, well, I don't think these things are extraterrestrial. I think they're ultra-terrestrial. And John Keel, who I knew, coined the term. But the concept I was pushing as far back as the late 1960s, when I realized they're not coming here from Mars. And they're not seen anywhere around Mars, the face on Mars notwithstanding. They're seen on or near the Earth. And that doesn't suggest to me the immediate notion of this, what I consider a false dichotomy. Either they are natural phenomena or hoaxes on the one hand, or they are spaceships from, used to say Mars when I first got into ufology, or uapoly, whatever they want to call it now.
It's not got a good ring to it, the uapoly.
Well, I prefer the term that I coined many years ago, which is para-ufologist, because clearly if you link all sorts of paranormal phenomena to being underlying it all from the same basis, although it manifests in a variety of ways, then you have overturned the notion that these things are separate categories, which turf wars have created this rivalry amongst, cryptozoologists don't want to talk about UFOs because they're not respectable, and occultists don't want to talk about cryptozoology because occultism is respectable, which is a very, very strange proposition if you get out there in the real world beyond the narrow little vaguely incestuous circle of people around the world that are actually involved in this kind of research. To me, fairly early on, it became apparent that all of these things have the same characteristic. And if you're aware of the background, and by the way, I read the Secret Commonwealth when I was about 14. There was a publisher that called itself University Books. They later got into softcore porn, but that's neither here nor there. Their habit in their earlier days, when I was a member of their book club, was anything that wasn't nailed down by copyright that had anything to do with the esoteric, they republished. So I had read the Secret Commonwealth, and I had read, for me, the most influential was W.I. Evans Wentz, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. And that was very eye-opening because that was the same time I had gotten involved in ufology, and the cases in Latin America in particular, and also in France, oddly enough, were of beings that if you took it out of the outer space context, they were exactly like the Fae, or, local names apply.
Yeah.
I mean, here, not 100 miles. Don't ask me to do metric. I have no idea what all that is. That's, but
We use miles here as well. So
yeah, I always say, die hard people who are very pro metric will always go into a pub and say, I want a pint of beer, not a liter,
yeah,
a pint. So, it's reverting to common units, and that is still what we use for the most part in America, except for scientific measures, which favor these little tiny amounts of things. End of sermon on the evils of metric. but um, the Evans Wentz book, uh, although it concentrates on Scotland and Ireland and I guess England and Wales as well, talks about the worldwide phenomena of the Fae. And right here in Georgia, as I was saying, maybe 100 miles from here, is this enormous gorge, Tallulah Gorge. The name is a Cherokee Indian name, but the Cherokee avoided this area because the Yumwi Chumdee, the little people, lived there and were said to have a cavern in which no one returned from. So they avoided it forever. I, of course, did a lot of research in that area myself. I never found the cavern, but I know other people, or have known other people who have and have lived to tell it. And then there are some, like Robert Kirk, who sort of disappeared into the ether and never were seen again, their memorials notwithstanding.
yeah, into the oblivion.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
I mean,
they may emerge, 1,000 years from now and say, okay, well, I was there for a day and a half, because time runs different in Magonia than here.
yeah, it's interesting where you have obviously the stories of the Fae right around the world, but it's interesting how they overlap in some of these window areas as well. So you've got like window areas. I know like the most common one that people know these days is like Skinwalker Ranch, you know what I mean? So TV show and all that kind of stuff. But these places are everywhere. Especially around like sacred sites and all that kind of stuff, as you know. What's your kind of theory on that in regards to like window areas and portals, and obviously is it a convergence point where these places are overlapping but they can come through, or what? Or what's your kind of theory on that?
I believe about a year or so ago, I think we discussed that on Twitter, and I was pointing out that what do you call it, the Midlands, the place where Scotland becomes narrower, has a ley line running straight through it. And of course, that's a very, very intense area for all kinds of the phenomena that I'm interested in. That's phenomena A, plural, it would be everything from Yeti type creatures to all kinds of phantom cats, which,
Yeah.
and to UFOs, to ghosts, lots and lots and lots of ghosts. And I think that anywhere you have a convergence of ley lines, which are telluric, earth, invisible markings. Actually, they can be visible to certain psychics, but you can know them by their effects. And the ones that what was his Alfred Watkins documented mostly in England, being English. Isn't confined to there. In fact, there are world maps of ley lines, and wherever you have two or more that converge, First of all, there's almost always a giveaway, either a natural feature such as a hill, usually a hill with a reputation as being a barrow or a burial ground, or whatever the local rumors or archaeological facts are,
Yeah.
to a church or to a kirk or to a
Yeah.
a
Which,
sacred spot or something, or a battle happened there. I mean,
yeah.
there are ghostly things at Culloden. A good reason for it, because a lot of people died there. But
Yeah.
that's the number of ghostly army sightings there is enormous. On the other hand, I lived for some years on a battle site of within within yards of a battle site that was
Mhm.
a very, very bloody one, in Ackworth, Georgia, which is near Mount Kennesaw, which was like the last Union defeat in the American Civil War. And nothing in the way because it's not on ley lines. It doesn't have any particular significance, and a lot of people died there. You might argue that cemeteries and graveyards have a certain power because dead people are there, many dead people from different generations, especially if it's an old one. And indeed, there are apparition cases in many, but some don't have them at all, or they're very sparse.
Mhm.
And from my personal investigations, I would say it becomes enhanced if there is that convergence of ley lines that runs right through it, as is frequently the case, because one of the first things that happen in that type of environment is somebody comes along and builds a church.
Yeah.
And one that I investigated on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, which was also a battle site in the whole world is a battle site, really,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Through time. Yeah,
but there
definitely.
was a particularly bloody one, which appropriately is called the Battle of Bloody Marsh, between the Georgia colonists in the early 1700s and the Spanish, who were ensconced in their castle of St. Mark in St. Augustine, Florida, and they decided to march north because clearly the Protestants up north had to be, brought into the true faith. And it was a huge battle on St. Simon's Island, and it is to this day known as the Battle of Bloody Marsh. Well, St. Simon's Island is on ley lines, and there are more ghost stories there than you can shake a stick at, as we say here in the deep south of America. So, including one particularly significant one that I actually was able to photograph the ghost. This is many years ago. And that is sufficiently bizarre that I don't know what the local politics of it is, but when I recently went back to look at some of the original research materials, talk about Orwellian things. It has the local accounts of this case, which goes back to the late 19th century, well, reasonably late, 1870s. They've changed the story completely. I don't mean that it's less of a story, but it's a different story.
Yeah.
Now, that may have something to do with the fact that almost all Anglican churches in America after the American Revolution suddenly decided that they were Episcopal churches, because that's happened in South Africa too. The people did not want to be associated with, the colonialists, but this is one, and there are others that chose to continue to be an Anglican church with a priest in residence. And this church, I think the original one burned down in the 1820s, which is very common. They rebuilt it, and the story that initially got me to go down there where there were many witnesses to the wife of the priest of that church in the 1870s, who died shortly after they were married and is buried in the churchyard, as you know, as was fashion at the time, and whose apparition has been seen over and over again by many people ever since. So I got my friend Jim Mosley interested in going down there, and we went, and I sort of wandered away from Jim and our other associate, who would not be a familiar name, because Jim called himself a psychic negative, which was to say, it's not that he didn't think these things had something to them. Mm-hmm. However, he tended to think that things did not happen around him, the interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wandered away, looked at the church from the graveyard, and something told me, and this is not common with me. I'm not, maybe I'm a little psychic, but I certainly don't. It's more like intuition than,
yeah.
Hey, Alan, do this. So take your camera and just point from the graveyard to the wall of the church and press the release on the 35 millimeter camera I was using.
Yeah.
And I did 1 second exposure. And in those days, I was into candid photography. So I used surveillance film, which is very high speed, black and white film. And sure enough, there was the face of a decomposing, but clearly female image, and it's just the upper part of the body, but you could see the late Victorian dress. It fit to a T the purported ghost. Well, when I went back, I had this gentleman who was, I think, interested in doing an interview with me for National Public Radio until I talked to him. And then he said, oh, well, I haven't found a buyer for that. I really thought that it would be like that. And I think he felt a little guilty. And I said, look, I'm primarily a field researcher, an analyst, and I like to fancy an historian of the movement, not a co-participant, so to speak, in most things. I have a too long history involved in this, and I have seen very, very, very little, and mostly under absolutely ludicrous circumstances. But I did take this photo, and it had been evaluated by two different competent laboratories, and they couldn't figure out, any other explanation for it. They didn't say this is an apparition, a ghost.
Yeah.
But they tried on every I'm sorry.
No, you're all right.
It's a mistake. They're renovating my building. And while renovating it, they're screwing up the emergency system so that it goes off periodically. Just ignore it.
It's
probably
right.
The Russian missiles are probably not inbound. And if they are, I don't think my running outside is going to quite protect me. It's like the old thing, duck and cover.
Right? You're under the table, you'll be fine, it's okay.
Yeah. Then your derriere blows up first, by a microsecond, So.
You get 20 millimeters, the chipboard's not going to help you.
Exactly. So
when I went back, interesting getting the photograph though as well, and that. But
the original I gave to Mosley to take to the Eastman Kodak lab in Rochester, New York, where they apparently employ someone whose only job is to do photo analysis of anomalous photos.
Right, okay.
And that report came back, but I no longer have the negative. I mean, I think they returned it to Jim. Jim was a very close friend of mine, but I don't know. I never thought to get the negative back because, I'd already published the story, I think in Saucer News, his newsletter from that period before he started Saucer Smear, Beer, Cheer, whatever rhymed with smear. When he ran out of words, he went to Saucer Clues, Saucer Blues, and then there was the issue dedicated to Gene Steinberg and I called Saucer Jews, which I thought was particularly funny because I don't know what the readers thought, but Jim was a close friend, and at that time, Gene Steinberg, who now runs a podcast and has for years, was his employee. So there was, Jim didn't have a prejudice bone in his body. It was very funny.
Going back to some of the kirks though you're talking about in regards to the ley lines. I mean, obviously, but a lot of these churches in the past that they built on all the old pagan sites as well. You know what I mean? So,
a lot of churches are built on old pagan sites.
Yeah. So that's like we've got one here which is always refer to this. It's like it's literally about 4 miles from me. It's like a 5,500 year henge up the top of a hill with burial mounds. And the Christians buried their dead in there at some point as well. They try and kind of claim it at a certain point. But you get a lot of phenomena. That's a definite kind of convergence point up there where you get a lot of phenomena happening and within this area. I mean, I've seen one of your posts you put up about the Bonnybridge area. In our area, we've got that here, quite a lot of phenomena has been through the years. Most of the kind of solid kind of UFO cases through the year. We have, say, like really, really prominent sightings, police involved, things like that. The whole thing at Bonnybridge, they're talking about like a 10, 15 mile radius for here. There's quite a lot of stuff goes on. I mean, but it's in a snippet of time, yourself, you don't see a lot, but through the span of time, you see a lot of phenomena kind of taking place through like decades rather than like obviously years and stuff. And you get your flaps and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I've got a picture as well. I mean, which is a pretty good picture. I shared a bit of it online with one of my friends in his podcast, but no kind of a lot of it. I'll show you it when we're done and let you see it. But it's quite a good prominent picture. It's something in the picture, and it's also at another site where there was like a lot of ghost activity. It's supposed to be like a lot of kind of ley line activity there as well, and there's a stone circle there. And this thing nipped in the photograph with 3 people at a wedding, and you see it, but it's in between them, actually, like over their shoulder. You just see it from there down. It's not got that part of it's lip or that there, but it's no overexposure, different teeth, all that kind of stuff. But they never even seen it. I mean, but this thing's prominent. But I'll show you when we're done. But it's one of the kind of profound ones I've seen. Never shared that online, nothing like that, because these things you share fucking online, people are just they'll just poo-poo it because they don't know anything about it or whatever else. Plus, it's to do with the people as well, no sharing that.
Well, I did send this at their request to a second lab, and I'll only just say it was in Eastern Europe, and it was a very advanced photographic military advanced lab to look at the photo, because if it was something natural, or I wanted it.
You wanted all that out, yeah.
Yeah, and if it wasn't, I wanted it to get, so to speak, a clean bill of health as something truly anomalous. And they as the same thing as the Kodak expert, they said, this is a really good high resolution photo, and whatever this is, it's about 9 feet off the ground. Hello. If it was a face and it was that far up, unless this was Homo giganticus, this was something that was floating as well, and within the bounds of the graveyard where this woman was allegedly buried. But there is a sequel here, because when I went back for this gentleman who said, maybe we can get you on National Public Radio or whatever, I went back and did the research, and they have completely changed the story in local outlets. Now, I have an opinion about that. The church finally, I don't know when, But sometime since I was there, they decided that they were an Episcopalian church, which, by the way, is no different if you know what the Church of England is like, if you've chanced upon it somewhere. There's no difference except they don't want to be associated with the colonial power. But it is now considered an Episcopal church, and in that Orwellian way, they put up on any site that deals with the ghostly phenomena of Christ Church, which has a very interesting history in and of itself. I mean, it's essentially where the Methodist Church started. The Wesley brothers came to convert the Cherokee and found themselves having to modify their views. So they came over as Church of England priests and went back as Methodists. And that's where the Methodist Church came from, probably because there was a book about it called Strange Fires, about confronting the frontier in the early 1700s in Georgia and having to revise one's opinions of what reality was all about. But anyway, apparently they're trying to say, there's even a thing, you can look it up on the internet, Christ Church, St. Simon's Holland, Georgia, and it will give again, Orwellian revised history, as if we're not Church of England. We're Episcopalians and have always been Episcopalians. And there are a couple of people on the island who, it's just fairly bizarre. So the original story, it's fortunate that I have a file on it, or I would doubt my own memory, except, Jim Moseley was there. It was documented when Gray Barker, for a brief period, took over Saucer News, bought it from Jim, and refused to give it back when Jim decided he'd made an awful mistake in selling it to him. And that was where Saucer Smear came from, because he wanted to get out something that had to do with his original title, which was his, going back to its original title, which was Nexus. Book 1, Tome 1. Then he discovered that a book and a tome are the same thing, so he changed that. But my point being that the original story, somewhere along the line, my guess is in local government and local church politics, which is taken very seriously out in the boondocks in Georgia, they have changed the history. And that has interfered with a whole series of sightings of this entity, going back to the time of the death of the young woman who was married to the priest of that church, or the priest of some other church that doesn't actually exist.
I've changed that. Interesting. But moving to you mentioned like going into like saucers and UFOs there, like in regards to like back in the day when you had the contactee movement, and now we've got a lot of different stuff now, and you've got like a lot of things like C5, and people obviously try to link with the phenomenon. Do you see things like that as some form of ritual that they are taking part in to bring this down, or is it just the attention and intention of these people being together that's potentially bringing something to them?
I think that it's like mediumship. It's something that lends itself to frauds happening, but that doesn't mean that all mediumship is fraudulent, and it doesn't mean that all contactees are frauds. And I'm not even sure that any of them are frauds in the true sense of that term. I think that having spent 5 years working the graveyard shift, the midnight to dawn shift, which is perfect for me, but you get some pretty weird calls from people in the wee hours, if you know what I mean. And I had like 3,000 clients in the 5 years that I worked for them. where was I going with that?
With the CE5 and the contactee.
Okay. So,
Maybe
yeah,
not
yeah.
even the CE5, but that type became the congregation they actually trying to maybe bring something down or what? Is it ritualistic in it, or is it that's kind of what I was asking.
What happened with mediumship is that physical mediumship, whether it ever existed or not,
Mm-hmm.
it got so many people, mostly stage magicians,
Yeah.
starting with Houdini, or as his real name was, Eric Weiss, who modeled his name on an earlier magician named Houdin. So, French magician said to be very good. A lot of basically unemployed magicians seem to get their jollies by duplicating physical mediumship and saying it's all bunk, as if you sort of, kind of duplicate something, that proves that the original didn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
which is utter bilge. That's just not the case. It means it can be duplicated, but it doesn't mean that it's not real. Of course, there are a lot of mediums who have been caught in rather unsavory bilking their grieving clients' cases, and that happens with mental mediumship as well.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I think that the many of the original contactee experiences started out as a telepathic or even shortwave radio transference of information from Magonia, from Fairy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even George Adamski, who certainly hoaxed a bunch of photos and set up a lot of things, and the further he got along in life, the more trips to Venus or wherever he was going happened, because there is that thing which, like on my major discovery in doing Psychic Friends, was you can't perform on cue. Just because somebody calls and says, "Where is my lost cat?" Maybe you have a flash of intuition, but 9 times out of 10, you don't, because it just isn't something that's available on an assembly line basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's harder to do. And I would fall back on doing a tarot reading, because I've been reading tarot possibly longer than anyone else alive. I mean, I've been reading it since 1962, and there may be some Romany people out there who,
Mm-hmm.
elderly Romany people who've been reading longer than that, but not that I know of, and certainly not the current crop of people who read the 11 million tarot decks that are out there now. 11 million being the scientific title.
Yeah.
So, so I would fall back on that, because it was very reliable, and it didn't involve my being psychic, just being my being a good interpreter. But in terms of, where is my lost cat at 4 a.m., that is way beyond my abilities, or I venture to say anybody's abilities. So circling back to your question, I think even George Adamski, sometimes during World War II, so circa 1940, 41, 42, somewhere in there, he had a paranormal experience in which he received information. I base that on the fact that when you use the, as I describe, you name my books, I don't want to plug them, but as I describe in, the Secret Cipher.
Yeah.
The ciphers of Al, as they were called by the British Journal of Ceremonial Magic, who discovered it. That was Jim Lees and Carol Smith. I believe Carol is still with us. And the recently deceased Jake Straighton Kent. They sort of broke this code that Aleister Crowley couldn't break. And in fact, in the code book, as I call Liberal, he was told that he couldn't break it. But just as with that, Adamski had a paranormal psychic experience, tried to sell it as a science fiction story, got turned down because the science fiction stories, other than those in Amazing and Fantastic, the 1940s magazines that Ray Palmer was running then, and
Yeah.
Ray was awfully sympathetic to this stuff, which my friend Dick Shaver was, really, and that is his real name, Dick Shaver. What a
Not the best job in the world.
Not only that, but his real name was Richard Sharp Shaver, and he wasn't Jewish, I mean, we get the little cut at, well, that's, shh, don't tell anybody. Earlier in life than we remember, but in any event, he couldn't sell it as science fiction and tried to write it as a physical event. And then he met Desmond Leslie, son of the prominent politician Sir Shane Leslie, and the rest, as they always say, is history. I don't blame Desmond Leslie, who, by the way, you're familiar with the original movie, not the Keanu Reeves version.
Yeah.
The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah.
I am poor these days. I come from a fairly well-to-do family, but decades of world travel plus my mother's household expenses, et cetera, ad nauseum, ad infinitum, that has been gone for a long time, and I actually had to work for many years until fairly recently, doing rather menial jobs. I wasn't in the colliery, digging out the coal, but I was working in a warehouse at 40 with people half my age lugging boxes around. So where to go with that? I'll go back to Adamski. I think that I was unaware until yesterday, maybe another synchronicity of sorts, that Patricia Neal, who was the female lead in The Day the Earth Stood Still with Michael Rennie, had done another movie in England for Pinewood or for, I don't know, the studio name. Anyway, I watch a lot of free movies on YouTube.
Yeah.
And endure the commercials, which are usually for something, I was unaware of this completely, but apparently she did another movie, an English version of The Day the Earth Stood Still, about a visitor from Venus who she falls in love with, which is virtually what, the story of, he didn't have a robot, that was the only thing. He had his friends from outer space who would blow up the Earth if they tried to crash their saucer. But it's basically, obviously, highly influenced by the Michael Rennie, Patricia Neal version. And the fact that she was the female lead in this film, too, I thought, got my attention. Mm-hmm. So I always watch the credits with movies. Like tomorrow I'll be going to see Oppenheimer. Yeah. And I will stay through the last credit, first of all, to make sure it's a union film, because all of our, my eldest son is a screenwriter and he's on strike.
Yeah.
And SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors and TV Actors Guild, is on strike in sympathy with them. So, but, and I like to see the union seal on films, although they don't put it on old films.
Yeah, I'll be going to see it as well.
Wait. Here, let me give you the kicker line.
Yeah.
Guess who wrote this film?
Who wrote it?
Du, 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 du.
Um,
I'm sorry, your time is up. It was Desmond Leslie.
right, okay.
Is that freaking weird or not?
This,
Clearly, this is after the book that he co-authored with Adamski.
Mhm.
But during that same period, I think the vintage is 1957, so it took several years after. And I was totally unaware that A, he had written
Yeah.
outright fiction, and B, that he had written this film about a visitor from Venus, which of course features prominently in Adamski lore.
Mhm.
There's a whole darker side of the whole Adamski saga, but suffice to say this: I think people like Truman Thuram, um, um, the crowd that used to assemble at Giant Rock in California.
Yeah.
I think some of them were delusional people, some of them were con men, most of them were actually having experiences which were not physical in nature but were very real,
Yeah.
and trying to translate them for a public that wouldn't laugh at them.
Yeah.
Others were having experiences, a term coined much later by my acquaintance John Keel, are silent contactees. And I think those cases are still occurring, but the amount of ridicule that the early contactees got has discouraged people from telling that kind of story.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a huge proliferation of a kind of mediumship that doesn't involve spirits of the dead, but involves astral beings,
Yeah.
beginning largely with the Seth material, the raw material, who I knew the people who channeled that, and they were 100% reputable people. They didn't even make any claims for the material. They just said, this is what we get. We can teach our technique to anybody.
Mhm.
And what it is has to stand on its own merits. And that was, curiously enough, in Kentucky, which is the equivalent of the Midlands in your own country,
Yeah.
a high density zone, which in that case is on a convergence of 6 different ley lines, but also is right above the largest cave system in North America.
Yeah. Yeah.
Runs all the way through West Virginia and Kentucky.
Yeah. It's massive. Yeah.
Yeah, massive, and people disappear there all the time. I heard a weird story just yesterday about some researchers who blundered into a cave where these people dressed in black robes were performing some kind of ritual, and they had the good sense to leave, which otherwise they may have become the enormous number of people who disappear worldwide, some of whom show up later, some of whom are evading the long arm of the law or the not so long arm of the law, some of whom are, getting out of bad marriages or bad debts or whatever,
Mhm.
but many of whom are gone without a trace forever. And of course, Richard Shaver had a good deal to say about that. Only he thought that the earth was honeycombed with caverns.
Mhm.
And I think what these caverns are is a convenient location for the Fae, the others, we'll just say,
Yeah. The others.
to have semi-permanent portals. And they come in and out of those portals. And of course, someone who goes through a portal that doesn't understand the notion of portals, someone like me who's a ceremonial magician, among other things, anyone who has opened an Enochian portal knows what portals are like. They go to other ethers, airs, the terminology shifts according to your own personal mythos, but it's going to, I like the term Magonia. It's just because it doesn't mean anything specific, but it means fairyland, the place where time runs different and things are not as they seem here.